I'm a bit of a fan of turn-based strategy. I've put a lot of time into games such as XCOM, Total War, Silent Storm and Massive Chalice. Valkyria Chronicles is another turn-based strategy game that I've played, although not as much. Hi, I'm Val from Hihu, and I want to talk about Valkyria Chronicles, a turn-based third-person shooter with RPG elements made by Sega. The game is set in what is definitely not World War II. It takes part in Europa, which is in Europe, where the autocratic East European Imperial Alliance, which is totally not the Axis, invade the Commonwealth of loosely allied democracies, which aren't the Allies. The Imperials also invade Gallia, a neutral country which is an amalgamation of the Scandinavian countries that were neutral in World War II. The reason given for this invasion is the rich Ragnite deposits in the Gallian land. Ragnite is a material that powers everything, provides lighting, heals people, and all sorts of stuff. It's basically just a magic rock which will answer all your problems. The game is centered around the Gallian Militia Squad 7, led by Welcome, the son of a First World War general, and seems to have been put in charge because he arrived in his dad's tank. He's joined by his adopted sister Isara, which they make very sure that you know is adopted. The second in command and love interest, Alicia, the grizzled old Largo, an anti-tank man with an obsession with vegetables, and Rosie, a stormtrooper who's a racist singer that learns to love and trust the people from the race that she hates. The story starts off normally enough, ignoring the children conscripted into the army. But as the story progresses, you get to see more and more weirdness, like the pig with wings that gets entirely too much screen time, to the rumoured calamity being the basis of the prejudice towards the Dark Sons, the game's replacement for the Jewish people, whose distinguishing features is that they have black hair. And the racism is really weak, and really strong at the same time. There's no middle ground. The troops are saying schoolyard insults like the Dark Sons are smelly, and that they say things like PU, then they load them off into death camps. Also, what's the deal with the Imperials just straight up gunning down civilians in open ground? At least the Nazis rounded them up first and did it out of sight, so the average soldier wouldn't know shit. The weirdness continues with the Valkyria, a magical Ragnite-powered ancient race with magic powers. However, I do like how all the characters are likable and not your standard archetypes like the no-nonsense general and the silent tough chick. The story is told through a scrapbook, and you select each cutscene, watch it, and then it dumps you back in so you can select the next one. Strangely, it's broken up into a few short cutscenes instead of just one big long one, which I think I would prefer. At the start of each one, it'll ask you if you're sure you want to play it, and being the only way to continue, it was really annoying. I felt like the cutscenes also outnumbered the actual gameplay quite a bit too. I felt annoyed, and was wishing that I could just get into the combat. You could skip through the cutscenes, but I thought it would remove the context behind the combat missions. The story is good enough for your first run through, I guess, but if you delete the only save file your game gives you, you're up shit creek, as you'll need to go through them all again. Speaking of combat, it's pretty unusual. You have combat points that you spend by selecting characters on the map, then zooming into third person where you control them while the enemy shoots at you. They will stop shooting at you when you start aiming at them, but it's a little inconsistent, as sometimes they will immediately stop shooting and other times they will finish off their volley. Everyone will immediately start firing back at you once you've taken your shot, so you'll need to end your turn quite quickly if you want to keep your people alive. Being close to one of your friendly units when you fire at someone will make them fire on the enemy as well, but if you leave them together, it will make them a bit vulnerable to grenades and mortars, which adds a little strategic thinking into the mix. You can take cover, which will eliminate headshot crits and make units harder to hit, but you're only able to do so behind sandbags and the odd trench. Behind other forms of cover, like chest-high walls and other things that you would be able to hide behind in, say, Mass Effect, they just stand there trying to catch bullets with their teeth. When you select a character, you have a certain amount of movement points, and if you select the same character again, you get less movement points, regardless of whether or not they've actually moved. The movement points are different for each class, but they don't really match that type of class. For example, the Stormtrooper, which has a machine gun, and needs to get in close, but has a smaller amount of movement points, which is really annoying and basically means you can't get them into the positions that you would have them in as a frontline unit. The snipers have the smallest amount of movement points, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, as they're only carrying a rifle with a scope, and the only difference between them and the scout, which has the most amount of movement points, is the scope, so it must be made of depleted uranium or something to slow them down that much. And I mean, the anti-tank guys have more movement points, and they carry a big fuck off lance around for God's sake. Also, every now and then your characters will get a buff or a debuff, depending on the environment and their own individual characteristics, such as allergies to pollen and dust, but also being around people that they like. This is never consistent. The buffs always happen when you don't need them, and only last a turn, as do the debuffs. It's an interesting concept having buffs and debuffs based on around individuals' feelings and abilities, but it needs to be done all the time, or at least most of the time. If you hate people, you hate them all the time, it's not just every now and then. There are also executive orders that can buff a unit or everyone. They cost action points, and they can be used once you've leveled up your troops to a certain level to unlock the buffs. It's also worth mentioning that if you kill one of the enemy red units, they lose action points. And it's the same if you lose one of your main characters. Although this isn't always the case, as special elite enemies are also red. And if you eliminate them, you get an Imperial weapon, which you can equip on your guys, but they suck, so it's more really just a collectible. The level up system is strange, as you level up all the troops of the same type, rather than individually. Also, you get to choose where you spend your XP, rather than just getting it from killing units, like in XCOM. This means that all your scouts are the same, and the individual ones don't really matter. You may like a certain unit like the way you like a certain pen, but if they die, who cares? There's plenty more where it came from. You can also upgrade weapons, but they only upgrade one ways, so it's a bit useless, and could have been unlocked by just progressing through the levels, but they need a crowbar in those RPG elements in somehow, don't they? The menu interface is probably the worst I've ever experienced. Never mind every single time I select the menu, cutscene or whatever it asks if I'm sure. Every time you need to upgrade a thing or level up a unit type, you have to go through the same conversation with the dickheads in the barracks every single time. And trying to replay a mission or go to a page further back in the book is a headache. It just could have been a lot smoother, and it's a pretty good example of what not to do. But probably the game's biggest sin is the ranking system. Each level you're given a score. The highest scores will give you more XP to spend. But it's only based on how many turns it took to complete that mission. Now, as the game is a turn-based strategy, it requires careful thinking, which is thrown out the window to a degree to get a good score. You can lose most of your people and leave most of the enemy alive, but if you finish in 3 turns, well damn, you still get an A. It hurts players that aren't too familiar with strategy, or those who want to take their time, as it leaves them with a deficit of XP, requiring them to grind out some more in the optional operations. I love the art style. It is in keeping with the scrapbook design of the story mode. Everything looks like a sketched anime, with the borders sort of just fading out. The artistic choices sort of limits your field of vision to a degree, but not to an enormous degree, and I hardly felt hampered by it. The music in the game is also pretty good, and added to the atmosphere a bit, but the little noise it made whenever you selected anything or exited a menu did get annoying. The controls all worked quite well. I used the controller most of the time, except for when I needed some precision with aiming, like using a sniper. I didn't have any issues with the game, like crashes or anything that sometimes plague PC ports. So, how does it hold up? Well, I don't know. All I can think of is the negatives, but I still like the game. It had an interesting story, if a bit weird, and it will grate on you if you try and replay it. The combat is fun and challenging, if a bit unfair at times. At least they tried to do something a bit different. So I guess I recommend it. The game would have benefited from more combat missions and less fiddly bullshit. If you haven't played Valkyria Chronicles, then yeah, not a bad turn-based strategy game. This has been Val reviewing Valkyria Chronicles Hihu. Like, subscribe, join the creator page, you know the drill, and thanks for watching.